Okay, hello everyone. Still going through Wes Bos's awesome JavaScript 30 class. I did the update CSS variables today, and I just wanted to walk through the code and do a little bit with the. He leaves you with the changing the variable for a certain element, and we'll talk that he leaves sort of hanging at the end of the exercise, and we'll talk about that a tiny bit. So first, you watch his exercise, so we're assuming you've watched and done the exercise, but I'm going to walk through what the JavaScript does. Sometimes when I do these tutorials, you're following along, you're typing, and you understand it, and you get to the end and you look at the big picture and you're like, what is all this stuff? I understood it as I was doing it line by line. So I like to go back sometimes and then walk through it out loud. Some people talk about the rubber duck debugging. This is sort of the same principle, where if you try to explain it to somebody, it solidifies it in your mind. So that's basically the point of these videos that I do. So again, assuming that you already did the exercise and have it working, we should be starting at the same place. Okay, so we're going to start right with explaining JavaScript. So what happens here in this JavaScript? First thing it does is sets up a constant variable called inputs, which contains this document query selector all. Remember that query selector all is going to return a list, a node list, right, of anything that matches this selector. So dot controls is anything with the class called controls, and then but not just anything controls, because we have the input here. We're saying anything that is controls but is also an input, right? So if we say log inputs, holy typing, you should see, in fact, we do get the node list of the three things that match that selection. The spacing. Ooh, I didn't actually mean to expand that. Yeah, whoa. Let's try that again. We get the node list. Oh, because I hit elements somehow off of instead of console. So we get a node list of these three things: the input for the spacing, which is over here. These three things: the input for the spacing. I did it again. I want console. Okay, input for the spacing, input for the blur, and input for the base color. Right. Okay, so we have access to those three things as a node list. Get rid of this console log. Okay, so what's the next thing? Function handle update. Okay, so we're defining a function. Inside this function, we're having a constant variable called suffix. I live in Sussex. It's not that. Suffix, which is equal to this .dataset .sizing or nothing. And so here we go, console log .this to find out what's the point of that. So we want to find out what the this they're referring to, or we are referring to at this point, just so we can further understand what's going on here. So when is this going to happen? When somebody calls this function. Remember, this is not being called yet. We're just defining the function. At this point, nothing is happening. We're just talking about what is going to happen when this function is run. It's not being run yet. So let's figure out, when is this going to run? It's going to run down here when somebody calls handle update, right? We'll get to that. So, all right, so let's figure out what this is. So this refers to the object above it, I guess is one way to say it. There's probably a better way to say that. But so what's the this in this case? It's the suffix. No, that's what we're defining it to. It's not handle update, because handle update isn't an object exactly. I mean, I guess everything in JavaScript is an object, including a function. That may not be 100% accurate, but it's going to refer to whatever calls this function. So what's calling this function is over here. This handle input is being called by the input. So it's referring to whichever input we're talking about. Now, how do we know which one? Let's skip down here for a minute. So we have this, remember we did this up here, right? And I said this is the list of inputs. So here's where we're talking about this inputs now. So we have the list of inputs, and we're calling for each on that list of inputs. Where for each is just basically much easier, more elegant way of doing a generic for loop, right? So it's looping over every one of these three things. And for each one, each input, it's going to do something. We're going to add an event listener to each one. So whenever it changes, whenever it's listening for a change event, right? So in this case, when we're changing the value of the spacing, call handle update. You change something, call handle update. Okay, so now we have some context for what handle update is doing. I'm clicking on one of these inputs, something changed, so now I know I have to handle update. So it changes the data set dot sizing. When you change this, it changes the sizing, right? So, and then it updates this, right? It makes sense. Okay, so it changes the name. Okay, so let's go. This they're referring to has a bunch of different things, as he did over here. Name. Let's just do this to show it a little better. This dot name. Now, when we change something, not only will it do what we did in the exercise, it'll console log whatever the this dot name is. So it should console log spacing, right? Okay, we could also do, what were some of the other things that were on there? On the this was the value, I think, right? So now when we change spacing, it should give us the name and the value, right? Okay. Some reason in Wes's video, he has the mouse move, and every time he moves this, it gives me the update. Every time on mine, it doesn't do that in the console, it doesn't show it, but it is working when I have the developer tools turned off. So I don't know if it's just there might be a switch somewhere in the controls here to update more frequently or something, but regardless, it's showed it all of a sudden. Whoa. Wasn't doing that before. Cool. Wonder if it's doing it now. Yeah, see, so now it's not doing it. Weird. Okay, so yeah, maybe there's a switch somewhere to have it update more frequently or something, but that's not the point. So again, this is not really that important to the functionality. This was just to sort of get an idea of what this is referring to and what things you can do with it. So remember, I've got name and value here. So if we wanted to just figure out what other kind of things we could do, just go back to console logging this, right? So what other things on spacing could we look for? So we had the name, we had the value, data sizing. So this, remember, the data is like you can make up your own attributes, but you just have to put data dash in front of it. So you could say to access that, you do this dot data set. Okay, so then when we do this, it should give us what was in the data set. The only thing that was in there was the pixels. Okay, so we could specifically say, what did we call it over there? It says sizing. So instead of getting that whole object with only one item in it, we can call it specifically. Now it just says the value of it, right? See how that happened? Because this is data set is an object. We called the one property on that object. So instead of giving us the whole object, it gave it just the part we asked for. So anyway, that's it for that. He left us hanging with this piece, right? He said, up here, he said, you can change the base style, right? The variable can be scoped, he said. So he did this, the base being badass, the color badass, right? So this way, when you change, you'll notice when we change the color over here, it's changed, but that stayed the same. Let's make it a little more obvious that light green is still going to stay light green when this turns pink, right? Because it's not being styled according to this base. It's got its own scoped base, right? So how can we access this then, I wondered. So I normally wouldn't put a script up here. I did it here just because I was trying to, I didn't want to have me scroll to the bottom, scroll to the top, scroll to the bottom, scroll to the top just to figure out. So put it here and we'll move it down to where it should be in a minute. So first thing I did was try to figure out how to access this specific place. So I gave it an ID of specific, and in my script here, I gave it a constant variable called selection because it's my new selection, and assigned it document.querySelector specific, right? So hashtag, or whatever you call it, specific to target the ID specific, which I called it here. So now I did selection.add an event listener, a click event, right? So when you have the event listener, you do the event and the callback, or I like to think of it as the callback. Sometimes it's just a confusing word for beginners, or it was for me. So it's the event. It's going to be the what happens, and or what you're doing on the screen, and then what happens when you do that, right? So what happens when you click it? It runs this anonymous function, right? So it runs the function, the selection, which is this piece, because we called it, remember this selection, we called document query selector specific. So we have this. Now on that selection, we can change the style. And within the style, we can set a property. So here's the style. We're going to set the property of the base variable, change it or set it from whatever was originally assigned to our new value. So you're going to see when I do the click, it will set the property of the base variable to purple, or it should, and there it goes. Now I didn't do anything to change it back. I just wanted to, this was just an exercise to see if I could target this without targeting the other part. So let's to show you that it is applying just to that piece and not to the whole thing. You'll notice if I change the color here, this hold on, this is that badass color we talked about. And click the color here, it won't change that badass, right? It should change it to whatever we want to change it to. These changed, that stayed the same. It's not telling this to change until this event listener, this click event. Now when I click this, it won't change this color, the base color over here. It'll only change this because I only have the event listener going onto this selection. So it changes it to purple. Okay. So now let's get this out of here because it says no business being up here. Again, I just put it there because it didn't like scrolling up and down while I was figuring it out. So that should be in here with the other scripts. This doesn't need to have that script tag in there because it's already in script tags. And hopefully this still works, even though I moved it down there. I don't see why I wouldn't, right? Picture is loading. Change the base color here. Should not change the base color of the scoped variable. This one changes this without changing this. Okay. Again, this is mostly when I do these, is mostly as a walkthrough to make myself sure that I understand what's going on. And I'm assuming he's done this once or twice already, that he's going to leave us hanging with something to fix on our own at the end. So I will try to offer my solution for what he leaves us with to do as a homework assignment. All right. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.